Welcome, everyone, to the Word on Fire show. I'm your host, Joseph Glore, and with me in the studio is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, good to have you.
Hey, Joe. Always good to be with you.
And also joining us today is a special guest. I think we can call him special, don't you think, Bishop?
Yeah.
The development manager here at Word on Fire, John Carney, is with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, John.
Thanks for being here, John. Coming all the way up from Orange County into this very smoky environment. Bishop, how you been hanging in here? I just drove up yesterday, and I feel like my lungs are already feeling the effects.
It's been rough for a lot of people. You know, the fires are still going above Montecito, and they're always worried about the wind shifting, and then it might come down to the more populated areas. But everyone's affected by the smoke. So these terrible clouds of smoke have come up, and ash is falling. It's just very unhealthy to be outside. So it's been a rough go for people, and the priests here have been terrific in their pastoral outreach to a lot of suffering folks up this way.
Are you nervous at all about the fires and where you live?
Not for me directly. The fires are actively burning about, 10 miles away from me. However, this fire has moved sometimes 6 miles in a day. So they're really going after it, trying to control it up in Montecito. But I guess I'd say I'm a little bit nervous. I'm more nervous for people who are much closer to the active flames.
Well, John, you have your own reasons to be nervous this weekend, don't you?
That's right. My wife is due any day now, and can't really wrap my head around the reality that I'll be in charge of keeping a tiny human alive any day now.
This is John and Emily's first baby. Yes. So I had the privilege of marrying the two of them. Was it last January?
January 2017, right?
Yeah, and so their first baby's coming, which we're thrilled about.
Exciting stuff. It's a little girl, right?
Little baby girl. Any day now.
Any minute now.
And I think, again, Bishop Robert Barron would be a good name.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Yeah, it's in the running. Definitely.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, today's episode, we want to talk about a new video that John had a hand in creating, and that's why he's here to share with us some insights about this new video called Testimony. If you haven't seen this new Word on Fire production, you can check it out at donate.wordonfire.org, or you can see it at Bishop Barron's Facebook page. So, Bishop, you've seen this video testimony. What are your initial thoughts on it?
Well, it's very moving to me. You know, it's three people, and one of them is your good self, talking about the effect that Word on Fire has had on their spiritual lives. And I was, as I say, very moved when I first saw it. You know, when you're doing this work day to day, you don't always think of the impact it's having or where it's going. You just, all right, I got through a video today. I'm going to write an article today. And then to hear people that, I mean, you never knew, sometimes all the way across the other side of the world, who are benefiting from it, is very moving and a source of great joy for me.
Yeah, Joe, you know, we receive messages every single day with similar types of testimonies, and we thought it was really important to then turn around and share these testimonies with other people.
Well, it's beautifully produced, and it was a pleasure taking part in it. I got to say, it was powerful for me to watch and see the other two testimonies that are in it. Bishop, why do you think that testimonies are such a powerful force of evangelization?
Well, go all the way back to, St. Paul telling his story of conversion in the Acts of the Apostles and in his letters. Go back to Augustine telling the story of his conversion in the Confessions. Come all the way up to Thomas Merton in the 20th century telling his story. It gives you what John Henry Newman would call real assent, real apprehension. So you can talk about ideas and concepts, and that's a notional thing. And believe me, I'm a notional guy, so is Newman. You know, we love ideas and words. But there's something about the real when it appeals to your senses and your direct experience that things have a real power. So when you tell the story of coming to Christ, that can be more powerful than sharing ideas about Christ, as important as that latter move is. But I think that's why, and why we still read the Confessions. And it strikes me, here's this fellow writing around the year 400 A.D. This is a long time ago, in a culture totally different than ours. And yet his story is still utterly compelling because it's everyone's story in a way. So I think that's why it's so powerful.
Well, let's get right to the video. I understand, John, that you've brought some clips with you today that we can share with our listeners to give them some kind of exclusive behind-the-scenes insights into these three stories.
Yeah, Joe, this clip here is Lieutenant Colonel Jason Murphy of the United States Army explaining how he listened to Bishop Barron's material overseas in Iraq.
It was somebody in passing that really said, there's this website where this priest does a homily every week, and you can download and then you guys can listen to it. We'd take the iPod out, and then we'd sit around and listen to Bishop Barron's homily for the week. When I looked at the amount of time I was spending with him and where I brought him, which was everywhere around the world, so Afghanistan, Iraq, he's always with me. I call him my longest pastor.
Wow. So what do you think about that, Bishop? You've got this soldier who's listening with his fellow soldiers all the way across the globe, and he calls you his longest pastor.
Yeah, his story is a powerful one, and it goes back a ways. We got a letter one day at the Word on Fire headquarters when I was still in Chicago, and it was the story of this gentleman and his fellow soldiers who would gather at their base, and it was either Iraq or Afghanistan, I forget now, but they would gather there, and there was no access to a priest or to a chaplain, so they would listen to my sermons that I had, recorded back in the basement of the administration building at Mundelein Seminary, and they listened at this base. And so for a long period of time, as he says there, I was sort of their long distance pastor. Well, then he told me, and it still moves me to think about it, when they were breaking camp or they were going somewhere else and they were closing down that place, he said they flew an American flag over the camp in my honor just to acknowledge, the impact. Well, here's this thing going on the other side of the world. I know nothing about it. And then, of course, it was wonderful. I've got it up on the wall in my home in Santa Barbara here. He sent me a beautifully framed that flag,
wow,
with the letter and everything. So that's one of my favorite possessions right now is that flag because it speaks of the outreach of Word on Fire. I love that thing, too, about the hidden impact, that you do something and it's the sowing of seeds. You have no idea where they're going to land. You don't know if they land on good soil, rocky soil, if the birds will eat up the seed. You have no idea. But that seed, starting in Mundelein, Illinois, in this little, 15-minute sermon, ended up taking root in Afghanistan, with a group of soldiers. So I love that part of the story.
Well, thanks so much to Lieutenant Colonel Jason Murphy for his service and for sharing his story with us. Now, let's talk about our next testimony. Carmen Martí is from Spain, but she attended high school here in the U.S., and she's attending college currently in the U.S. You have a clip from her, don't you, John?
Yep, here's Carmen.
Over 70% of people in Spain are Catholic. There aren't young adults, people my age, going to church. You take your first communion because that's what everybody does, and you're supposed to do, even though you don't necessarily go to Mass even on Sundays. So that's the sort of experience that I had growing up. The faith was just there, and you had to do it, and it didn't really matter if it made sense or not, and there's no reason behind it.
So we've heard this story before, huh, Bishop?
Yeah, we sure have. In some ways, she gives eloquent voice to European secularism. So she came of age in Spain. And I had that experience when I was filming over in Spain a couple of years ago, and we talked to our sound guy who was a local, Spaniard. And he looked at us as like, well, kind of quaint, and isn't that nice? You Americans are still intrigued by this religious thing. But he said, we're an old culture. We kind of been through all this. And, he kind of patted me on the head in this secularist way. Well, Carmen's talking there about coming of age in that kind of culture where there's still a veneer of Catholicism. So the kids go for their first communion and all that. But, in terms of a substantive view of life, forget it. And that's how she came of age. What's happening now in our country is the secularism, which has been rampant in Europe for a long time, is now more and more, I think, coming into our country. So that's why I think her testimony is an important one. How would you address someone who's been shaped by a secularist ideology? Because our young people here in this country are increasingly shaped by just such an ideology.
And you can kind of hear the indifference in her voice when she spoke about growing up in the faith. And it's that, not aggressively atheist or not aggressively Catholic or Christian. It's the indifference that It kind of seems like that's how they slip into the nun territory.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because I've often felt, give me an aggressive atheist any day, because with an aggressive atheist, you get some traction. If they're coming at you, I hate religion because of this, this, and that. Okay, let's talk about this, this, and that. But if someone has just drifted into a bland indifferentism, they sometimes don't have enough energy even to have a religious conversation.
Yeah,
they
who
can't even
cares?
muster a good question about it.
Right.
It's like, well, all right, you got your hobbies, I have mine. So I think that's right, John. That's in some ways a more dangerous position. Is this bland, who cares, indifferentism?
And what's our next clip, John?
The next clip I'll play is where she is introduced to Word on Fire and you, Bishop Barron.
He was so convinced about what he was saying, and he believed it, he lived it, and he actually had reasons why, what he believed was true. That just kind of struck me because I had never really thought about truth. I had questions, and I was actively seeking answers. I wanted to know what the meaning of life was. I wanted to know why I was here, and if that mattered at all.
What do you think about that, Bishop? It sounds like everyone at some point must be faced with this question.
Yeah, what I love about that, a number of things, but one is her preoccupation with the truth. I've wrestled all my adult life with what I call dumbed down Catholicism, or the reduction of Catholicism to social justice or social action or ethics. That's a Kantian move. I've often argued. Immanuel Kant said in the 18th century that, really, when you get down to it, religion's about ethics, right? It's about being a good person or dedicated to the poor or social justice, all of which are great, don't get me wrong. But there's more to it than that. There's a matter of truth. What's it all about? Does God exist? If he does, what's the meaning of my life? Who is Jesus Christ? What is the church? What are the sacraments? How am I saved from my sins? What's eternal life? Well, those are very interesting and extremely important intellectual questions.
Yes.
And it's bugged me no end all my life that even religious people will often bracket all that as though, well, you got your opinion, I got mine. Who really cares? If deep down we're good people. I love her instinct because it's John Henry Newman's instinct. It was Augustine's instinct. It was Thomas Aquinas' instinct for the truth. What's the truth? Religion is not just trading in subjective fantasies or in personal preferences. It's making truth claims. And I love her restless, inquisitive intellect that wants to know, okay, is it true or not? And may her tribe increase. You know what I mean?
Amen.
May there be an army of Carmens who are raising those questions, because that drives me crazy within the church of the last, let's say, 50 years.
I think her response, too, flies in the face of all the people that constantly tell us that her peers and people her age don't want that intellectual challenge.
Yes. No, quite right. Quite right. And I'd love her to make the rounds of Catholic institutions and talk about her experience of what got her interested in the faith. Think of a Thomas Merton. Like her, I mean, he was a inquisitive, smart guy. And it was reading Etienne Gilson's treatment of Thomas Aquinas' philosophy that got Merton interested and led him eventually into the depths of the mystical contemplative life. So stop bad-mouthing intellectualism. I mean, it's a very venerable and important path.
Yeah, Carmen's story is such a great one, and you really have to check out the rest of it at donate.wordonfire.org. Watch her whole story. You'll love it, and I think it'll be particularly interesting, captivating, and inspiring for young students and for young people to watch.
Yeah.
All right, well, what clip did you bring from my story, John?
Yeah, Joe, I don't think I can sufficiently state how powerful your testimony is. I already knew your story, but when I watched this video, it still kind of blows me away. And I have a couple clips here for us. And this first clip picks up where you were from Illinois and you had gotten your master's in English, but you'd really latched onto bodybuilding and you moved to California to pursue bodybuilding.
I was flown out by Gold's Gym International to live in a house in the desert in Palm Springs area, and we just partied every single day, and I just did photo shoots from fitness magazines. The more I got into bodybuilding, the less I cared about anything else. I just got tired of seeing my own images all the time, looking in the mirror all the time. And I remember after like an 8-hour photo shoot, just feeling like the sense of like utter lack of accomplishment. I lost a lot of who I was. The number one emphasis in my whole life was this kind of grand vanity. After having pursued all these different routes of self-aggrandizement, I said, I'm going to start pouring myself out, and then I'll feel fulfilled, if I start living for other people. Gosh, yeah, it's so strange to hear my own voice, because it puts me back in that moment every time I hear it. Just feeling like I'm trying to fill up a God-sized hole with pebbles, with things that will just never do the job. And even though I was moving into this realization that it feels a lot better to be good than to be bad, that the greatest deeds I could ever do would never be enough.
Yeah, and Joe, your story, which I have now known personally for a while, is a powerful one. I think it's great for people to see, because it's an Augustinian story in some ways. You're making your way toward the fullness of the Catholic faith, and you're going by certain steps, And it's an itinerary of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Try this and try that, and go here and then go there. But you were sensing you were on the right path, and it was moving you a certain way. And then, of course, there's a providential move when your dad introduced you to one of my videos. Wasn't that it?
Yeah.
And then you just watched one, and okay. But then it led you to others and others and others. And that's why it goes with God's providence is. He'll often lead us by the path of dissatisfaction. That's okay. And that's why people should not give up when they're feeling lost, because sometimes God makes you lost. God wants you to be lost for a while because he's got to get you away from something. And then I remember this great wise professor of mine years ago saying, whenever you're in the desert, look for green shoots, because there's always going to be some sign of life somewhere there, because God, just as the Spirit led Jesus into the desert, so the Spirit leads us into the desert. And you might say of depression, of anxiety, of I don't know where I'm going, I'm kind of lost. Okay, but where are the green shoots? There's some signs of life, And as you tell the story, that's what strikes me, is you're telling us about signs of life. First, in a more evangelical kind of setting, and then eventually Catholicism. So I think all that is really powerful for people.
One thing I want to make sure the listeners know is that what really rocked my world, and that's the term I use, and of course it's a Baronian term, I heard that in one of your sermons, is when I started listening to the homilies. So I followed the natural pathway that I think that Word on Fire sets up its evangelization. You set out these things into YouTube that everyone can access easily, and after I watched all of them, every single one, because I found them so fascinating, that's when I discovered that there's podcasts exist finally. And when I moved into that sphere, that's the greatest watershed moment of my spiritual life, I would say, is when I heard your sermon, particularly the one on humility as the queen of virtues, because it took me through the 3 paths of holiness, which Bishop Barron, which you talk about, finding the center, knowing that you're a sinner, and realizing that your life is not about you. And that humility one was that third part, which for me, even in the Christian sphere, I started still kind of looking at Christianity through my own wants, my own desires, and trying to put a Christian spin on it.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad to hear you talk about the process there, because for you, it was starting with the YouTube videos, and that led you to the sermons. We started Word on Fire with the sermons. That's how the whole thing got started. And it was, I was on the radio at 5:15 on Sunday morning for 15 minutes. And then that became a website where we housed the sermons. That was about it. We expanded out eventually into the YouTube world. But for you, it was the sermons had a really galvanizing impact after you were drawn in by the YouTube. But that's my sense of the social media world, is that's the sowing of seeds. You put this stuff out there. These are not people who will come to church. You were naturally coming to Catholic Mass.
I had no interest in Catholicism at all.
But so you wouldn't come. We have the best programs in the world. Hey, our parish, we got everything going on. But if people aren't coming, what's the point? So my instinct has been, we've got to be proactive and kind of aggressive in getting the word out into the world where people are, and then the seeds might get planted. And that happened in your case, I think, pretty clearly.
But Joe, let's get back to your journey, because before you were even introduced to Bishop Barron and Word on Fire, and you're kind of on that Augustinian restless journey through faith and getting closer to truth, you were at that point invited to a non-denominational church, and you kind of ran into a problem there, right? Let's listen to this clip.
The Christian way is the way. For sure, I was confident in that, but now I have to believe that a dude was in a whale and the earth was created in 7 days. And best case scenario, I wouldn't get an answer because it's non-denominational, so no one really has a hardline doctrine, and it's whatever you perceive to be the truth of the scriptures is true. Yeah, I had actually gotten so fed up with so many incongruencies within all the different teachings I had heard, and then the other people who were just saying, well, just read it and figure it out. And as an English teacher, I knew that was wrong because I would never give my students Hamlet and say, read it and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and you wouldn't put your mind to rest. I mean, there's never, with authentic religion, a sacrificium intellectus, right? There's never a sacrificing of the mind. I'm with Newman there again. Newman said one of the signs of a properly developing Christianity is that it thinks about the faith. Whenever someone tells you, oh, no, don't ask that question. No, don't even try to find an answer. That's ipso facto a bad form of religion, you know? And what you were doing was following the mind that God gave you that was asking questions and seeking answers. Good, I say, as a Catholic and as a bishop. I say, good. Give me all your questions. Read Thomas Aquinas. You want 10,000 questions about religion. He's got them, you know? So anyone listening to me, anyone that ever tells you you can't ask that question, that's a bad religion. And get out of it, you know? So there it's like Carmen, you know, who was seeking intellectual answers. So were you. Now, there were a lot of other levels to this. I don't want to reduce it to that. But at a certain point, that became a pressing matter for you. And you didn't find it in the sort of non-denominational evangelicalism that you were in. And you eventually found it in Catholicism.
And yet, hearkening back to why testimonials are so important, a common thread here, as you'll see when you watch the entire testimony video, is that all three of the people featured were influenced by someone else giving witness and giving their testimony. Lieutenant Jason was told about Word on Fire from one of his friends, and Carmen had a very influential teacher here in the States who passed on Word on Fire material. And Joe, your dad shared one of Bishop Barron's sermons with you.
Yeah, so for our listeners out there, this is a great opportunity for you to go to donate.wordonfire.org and watch these videos. And remember that when you share this video, or you share any Word on Fire content with someone else, or you make a donation, or you purchase a DVD, that source is going to go into the heart and mind of someone else, and you continue to propagate Christ's message and fulfill the Great Commission. So it's a beautiful thing. It's something that we all need to take part in. We're all called, all of us baptized people are called to be evangelists. So go to donate.wordonfire.org, watch the rest of this video, and be inspired. And now it's time for our listener question. Remember, if you have a question for Bishop Barron, you can go to askbishopbarron.com, where you can record your question from any device, and you might be featured on one of our upcoming episodes. Well, we've been talking today about our global reach here at Word on Fire, and I think this question is a great example, as we have a Chinese student living in England, and his name is Richard. And here is Richard's question about biblical criticism.
Hi, Bishop Barron. This is Richard, a Chinese student living in England. I became a Christian several years ago through reading the Bible, but since I was introduced to the biblical criticism, which almost destroyed my faith, not so much in God, but in the Bible, I wonder if you could take some time commenting on this issue. Thank you very much. God bless.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's so much you could say about it. I'll say a couple quick things. One is you're referring to the historical critical method, which became prominent in Catholicism, let's say after 1950 or so. And the stated purpose of that method is to uncover the intention of the human author of the scriptural books. Sort of look back at the time when Isaiah was written, let's say, and what was on the mind of the author, what was he trying to do in his historical and cultural context. Legitimate question? Yes. The methods, legitimate as far as they go? Yeah. Read the great people like Raymond E. Brown and Joseph Fitzmyer and John Meyer, all those people. But is this method sufficient for understanding the Bible? No. And I say it with emphasis because it was a great move that Joseph Ratzinger made in the late 80s. He called for a supplementing of the historical critical method with other methods. Look at the way the church fathers and the great medieval doctors read the Bible, where their focus was more on the intention of the divine author, if I can put it that way. They weren't indifferent to the more historical issues, but they were above all interested in what God was trying to communicate in these biblical texts. Read what's called today canonical criticism, which puts a great stress on how the whole Bible is making an argument, presenting a story. We shouldn't just look at the individual books, but at the purpose of the entire Bible. Anyway, there's a lot written on that, and I would encourage you not to abandon the historical critical method, but to supplement it. A very good place to start, get Pope Benedict's books on Jesus. Read the opening section of that, and you'll find a really good treatment of these very themes I'm talking about.
Thanks so much for listening to the Word on Fire show. And remember, folks, you can watch the entire testimony video at donate.wordonfire.org. And while you're there, can I ask you personally, please make a donation to Word on Fire. And John, since I'm asking people to make a donation, maybe it's a good idea for you to explain a little bit about how Word on Fire operates.
Yeah, Joe. A common misconception is that we are subsidized or funded by the Archdiocese or some other organization, but that's not true.
So we don't make any money from the Catholic Church?
No, we don't. We're completely independent.
So when people tithe, they put money in the basket, we don't get any of that money?
That's right, Joe. Actually, we're a 501c3 nonprofit.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Essentially what that means is we are not for profit, so our owners aren't becoming independently wealthy or anything like that. And we're also not publicly traded, so no one's increasing shares of equity, or we're not issuing dividends to shareholders. Basic costs of production and labor and overhead, all of that money goes right into making these great materials.
So in effect, every dollar that Word on Fire receives goes towards evangelization.
That's absolutely correct, Joe.
Again, go to donate.wordonfire.org, make your donation, and we'll see you back here next week for the Word on Fire show.